Welcome back to House Education on March 15th. Going to continue conversation with the Vermont School Boards Association and getting their reaction to the committee bill that we've developed around accountability and oversight of approved independent schools that receive public dollars. I think, Sue, we'll just turn it over to you to hear what you have to say.
Hey, thank you very much. My name is Sue Siglowski. I'm the Executive Director for the Vermont School Boards Association. And today I'm here on behalf of the Education Equity Alliance, which consists of the Vermont School Boards Association, the Vermont Superintendents Association, the Vermont NEA, and the Vermont Principals Association. Vermont communities, taxpayers, K through 12 students, and schools are now at a defining crossroads. As your committee has learned, in June 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court set new rules related to taxpayer funding of private schools. And what the court said was that a state does not have to provide taxpayer-funded tuition to private schools, but if it does, it cannot exclude private religious schools. As we look at the Supreme Court's ruling in relation to Vermont's tuition program, it has shown that there are some real equity and accountability gaps in Vermont's current system. You heard from Neil O'Dell, VSBA president, about the data on some of those gaps a week or two ago. And he also talked about the financial impacts of running two parallel education systems in Vermont. One that is public and it's open to all, that has transparent budgets and accountability to taxpayers who vote on those budgets. And the other that is private and available to some without that transparency and accountability to the taxpayers. The Supreme Court's decision opens the door to changes to Vermont's taxpayer-backed education fund, which, as you know, is always under cost pressures. And that is through more funding of private schools, including religious schools. At the same time, the compelled support clause in Chapter 1, Article 3 of the Vermont Constitution says that no person can be compelled to support any place of worship that's contrary to the dictates of conscience. As elected officials, you take an oath to uphold the Vermont Constitution, and so you have to figure out if there's a way forward that will comply with the Supreme Court's ruling and the Vermont Constitution. We believe that the way forward requires Vermont lawmakers to reset state laws governing the use of Vermont's education fund based on universally shared values. And those values are, it's our duty to provide an equal education opportunity for all families. And all education fund dollars should be subject to consistent transparency and accountability. Also, all taxpayer-funded schools must treat students and staff equitably, free from unlawful discrimination. The Education Equity Alliance will support legislation that's consistent with the values of equity, accountability, and transparency, and that passes Supreme Court muster. And that is why we have supported H258, which is consistent with those values. And we think you should move forward with work on that bill. There are adjustments that could be made to that bill to address concerns that have been raised. For example, the number of schools a non-operating district can designate could be changed. 3 is not the right number according to the feedback we received. Another example would be that the bill's provisions regarding the requirements for which private schools are eligible for designation could be examined. But I know I'm here today to talk to you about your committee bill. So that's what I will proceed to do next. It does need a significant amount of revision. We understand that it's a work in progress. So I'm here today to provide you with some of our ideas about how the bill could be improved. And we're going to continue to think about ways to improve it. First, 2025 seems like an unnecessarily long time to wait for the attestation process. to unfold, especially considering that non-discrimination is now required by the state board rules. And the reason why I say 2025 is that in the bill, the secretary has to come up with a attestation form by, I think it's September 1, 2024, that needs to be completed by districts on August 1. So it would effectively go into effect in 2025, it appears from the bill. We'd also appreciate it if you could give some attention to ensuring greater equity by reducing barriers to enrollment at private schools for tuition students, similar to the way that public schools enroll students. Current admission policies at many private schools serve to discriminate against students for a variety of reasons. Also, please consider ensuring that all tuition students receive access to the same high-quality education as students at public schools, including an education that accomplishes the goals of Act 1. And a few of the goals of Act 1 include increasing cultural competency of students, promoting critical thinking about history, and ensuring that the curriculum and programs are welcoming to all students. Next, the word agree should be removed from the committee bill. If a private school is going to be eligible to receive public tuition, the law should contain certain requirements and not use the word agree. The bill is not a contract, it is legislation. Next, the committee should take testimony from experts or at least take a look at the language in the first eligibility requirement in the bill. And that is the school agrees to enroll any student who requires special education services. This language comes directly from Act 173, and it currently does not address students on 504 plans. And that should be corrected so that it's clear that private schools eligible for public tuition are required to provide accommodations under Section 504. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is a federal civil rights statute prohibiting discrimination on the basis of disability. It's not a special education statute, and it has a broader scope. And I would note that the state board rule that was developed in response to Act 173 does include 504 students, so it just makes sense for you to include 504 students in the language in the bill. It appeared from reading sections 3 through 9 of the bill that an independent school meeting education quality standards would be eligible to receive tuition without having to meet the other eligibility requirements that are set out in the bill. So if that is the case, that should be corrected. And section 15C, requiring the AOE to review all policies public schools are required to adopt and make a written recommendation to your committee and the Senate Education Committee about whether those policies should apply to approved independent schools that are getting public tuition. We think that should be changed to a study committee that would be looking not only at policies, but all laws, rules, and quality standards and reporting requirements that are applicable to public schools. And finally, I wanted to respond to a couple of things that Secretary French mentioned yesterday in his testimony. He talked about contracts with independent schools, and we've checked with superintendents of tuitioning districts, and it turns out that very few have contracts with independent schools, and that those that do exist, they do not contain a full set of assurances that you would hope to see in those type of contracts. In fact, they're often generated by the private schools themselves. So I wanted to provide you with that information. And also there was an assertion that invoicing was a way to keep track of students. That invoicing typically happens twice a year, so it's not an effective way to keep track of whether students from your district are in attendance at the school in a regular way. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Can we have that testimony for the committee? Do you have it so that it can be shared with the committee?
I could get it into that format.
Yep.
Yes.
Please do. We'd like to post it for today and have it available.
Thank you.
Yes.
Because I couldn't take notes fast enough.
Yeah, there was a.
I got all
So I did have a question about some of the testimony yesterday from Secretary French, and I think you hit on it. His belief that using contracts and invoices as a tool for assurances and absences. And I was just sort of thinking about the process in my head, but you made it sound like it's even harder to do than what I was thinking. But essentially I guess I think about a superintendent who is managing 13 contracts, such as they are. There is not a standard contract, is what you're saying, that the AOE has set up to use.
Correct.
And then I was thinking about, well, how is one superintendent whose job it is to be an educational leader turning into a contract negotiator? And I was sort of thinking about what is their capacity. And this would be a better question for your colleagues in the VSA, their capacity to enter into negotiations, because that would imply that they also have the power to just withhold money, which I think would be very problematic from a sort of, impact on a day-to-day kid going to school. So I guess, I don't know if you have any comment on sort of, yeah, I think you have basically said what's there is insufficient. I guess I'm now wondering if it was sufficient, what's the capacity of a superintendent or a school board to sort of negotiate and use those as tools?
It would take a significant amount of time, I think, and that would, of course, take away from other priorities.
Representative Stone and Representative Buss.
So theoretically, if these contracts existed in a perfect world, waving a magic wand, what would you like to see on those contracts? And if you had the capacity to oversee those contracts, what would you want to see on there? Like expulsion, suspension, yeah, I'll leave it up to you. What would you like to see?
Oh, well, I can at least give you a partial list. I think that one of the, I would start with the enrollment process, and that they would need to annually inform the district about the capacity that they have, and then also would be required under the contract to enroll all publicly funded students who seek to enroll unless the number of students seeking to enroll exceeds that reported capacity. And, there could be other details in the contract about how that process works through a lottery or something that is non-discriminatory. And then I would, there would be a prohibition on the school requiring things like admissions testing, standardized test scores, looking at the student's academic record, letters of recommendation, campus visits, open house attendance, interviews, also prohibiting the payment of any extra, requiring the payment of any extra fees, like fees for admission, fees for enrollment, fees for textbooks, laboratory technology, family fundraising fee. These are all things that you can find on private school websites in the state of Vermont.
These are things that should be included, you said?
They should not be allowed. Yeah. So those are the type of things that I would have in a comprehensive contract, along with, a a lot of other assurances such as compliance with education quality standards, having to report after a certain number of unexcused absences like you have in the bill, but also requiring them to comply with laws that the state of Vermont has on suspensions and expulsions, and notifying the LEA when those type of things occur. I think another important thing that would be for them to report back on to the district that is paying the bill about how the students are doing. You have a little bit about that in your bill, but I think it could also include things like the state assessment data. And maybe a statewide approach to that would be better, and actually having that posted on the agency's website. But there's, I'm sure I could come up with a list more to the list, but there's a lot that should be covered. And it may not be that a contract is the best way to handle it, but yeah.
You mean as opposed to just putting it at statute?
Exactly.
Representative Buss.
So if there was some sort of statewide contract, or if this type of work was put into statute, what do you see as the best way to enforce it to happen? So what happens when this information isn't delivered? Do you have any ideas?
Well, one of the things one of the mechanisms for enforcement already exists in state law is the Public Accommodations Act. And that act itself could be amended specifically to be very clear that schools, approved independent schools that receive public tuition are subject to the act. And that would provide a route for a student or a student's family that feel that there's been some type of discrimination that occurred, for them to be able to have a way to address it, rather than just asking the state board to take away the school's ability to receive public tuition. And when you think about it, I mean, that would be such a, if you only have the option to take away the school's ability to receive public tuition, then you are, you're upsetting the apple cart for that student and for many students. Whereas if you have an actual way for the student themselves to get some type of way to address the situation, they may be able to stay in the school, and it may improve the situation for other students that are in the school.
I think I'd represent Austin first and then Representative.
Okay. So are there different governance models for each independent school, or do the independent schools have a prescribed governance model? Or do you meet with them or talk with them at all?
I don't know if there are different governance models. My basic impression is that they have a board of trustees.
Mm-hmm.
There,
Does the Vermont School Board Association have any conversations with these board of trustees?
on a particular on this topic, or?
Just on, just kind of like you would with other school boards in the state.
Not specifically, no.
Representative Williams.
Yes, just a follow-up on Representative Buss's question, the enforcement. Is there anything in Act 173 that might address that? As far as, accommodations and discrimination?
There is, Act 173 does have language in it regarding students on an IEP. And I wouldn't say that there's enforcement in Act 173. There is a process through which if an independent school is not able to provide the services that a student needs, then there is a process that is set out in the law that includes arbitration or mediation, or there's some type of a process in there to address that and resolve it. But I wouldn't say that it's an enforcement mechanism.
Representative Stone?
Just to clarify, Act 173 and these other things we're talking about are for children who are on like IEP plans. It's not just for a kid who say doesn't go to school for 2 weeks and then it's not because these contracts don't exist or statute doesn't exist, that information is sent to the school, right? So the things that we have in place, it sounds like are just for children who are on IEPs, not just a child and who's,
Right.
who's not.
Representative Buss?
Yeah, that, I'm going to follow up to my earlier question. So it seems as if we have mechanisms in place to address individual children that might be discriminated against. But do you have any thoughts about enforcing things such as what you have suggested, education quality, like the truancy laws on suspension and expulsion? What would be your thoughts on enforcement when it is an overall policy and not tied to one student?
Certainly, a system like the district quality standards that are being developed for public schools could be applied to a private school receiving public funds.
I think ultimately, the sort of only real enforcement tool that exists is the fact that these are tuition paying districts that can, I suppose, stop paying tuition. But as Sue said, that can have an impact on the student.
Right.
Honestly. Could you talk a little bit about assessment? You said that, as we continue to go down this road, I keep learning more and more as we go, and I think, I didn't know that. And one of them is that I didn't realize that assessment data for independent schools, I can certainly understand non-publicly paid students that we don't necessarily have a public right to know, but assessment data on publicly funded students, I think, goes right along with oversight of our public dollars.
Yes.
You said that maybe you could look at that on a statewide basis. Could you explain what you meant by that?
What I meant by that is that the assessment data for public schools is available on the Agency of Education's website. And approved independent school students take those same assessments, but the data from those schools is not available on the website. I don't even know if you could get it through a public records request. I'm hoping that you could, but it's not publicly available.
So were you suggesting that, it should be publicly available?
Yes.
I think that for sure.
Yes.
But that it should be available through the AOE website. And I guess we often worry in small school districts that you sort of have to aggregate a lot of the assessment data so that you're not identifying, frankly, very small populations of students.
Right.
Which may be the case here as well. And I guess I didn't know if you were suggesting that we should aggregate it statewide for independent schools or come up with some sort of metric that aggregates enough numbers, or maybe do it on an SU basis or
I haven't really thought about it at that level, but I certainly would like to give that some thought. And I think that there are plenty of approved independent schools receiving public money that could be reported distinctly as a school.
I think
Depends on
about an approved independent school that the basic business model is receiving public dollars, which I might broadly define as more than half the kids are on public dollars. It seems to me that that's one metric you could use to say, your assessment data should be public.
Yes.
Along those lines.
Yeah.
Looking around for some other questions. Would you just repeat what you said? We talked about looking at all policy, required policy that might apply. And then you said not just policy, but rules.
Rules, laws, quality standards, and reporting requirements. And
again, just that was for, frankly, for the AOE to look at and report on, not to, we aren't requiring that in the bill. Everybody. We had a little bit of response, I'm going to just try to find here if I can, that I wouldn't mind having you comment on. The 4 town academies sent in some testimony with some, I thought, constructive suggestions. To basically facilitate more back and forth conversation between the LEA and the independent schools. And basically saying, instead of stating specifically in the bill how many unexcused absences triggers a reporting requirement, but rather sort of have that part of the conversation that would also cover what sort of reporting requirement the two sides could work out for tracking annual progress. And I didn't, I frankly just sort of came up with 3 because it seemed like a good number. But I guess, do you have any concern with that number for unexcused absences sort of being negotiated between the two sides?
No.
That was, I guess, one of them.
Are you, when you say negotiated between the two sides, are you saying you would put it in the bill afterward?
No, what we
Okay.
had said was, in the bill, we talk about that the AOE would work with stakeholders about annual reporting of student progress
Okay, yeah.
between the LEA and the independent schools, rather than us dictating how that has to take place. And what they are suggesting is, why don't you make unexcused absences part of that conversation as well, rather than sort of dictating it in the bill itself.
And then that would get reported back to the committee.
Well, no, that would then be, whatever it was sort of agreed to would be the standard.
But it would get reported back to you like next session, I think.
I have to read the bill in a little more detail to be able to answer that. I mean, what we had basically said was that the LEA, through the Agency of Education, that they would work together with LEAs and independent schools to come up with a standard reporting device for student progress. It did not say, and then bring that standard reporting device back to the legislature for approval or anything. And I think what the suggestion here is make reporting of unexcused absences. I think we might add to that any enrollment changes. That greater conversation, rather than us sort of dictating what it would be in the bill, but rather have that be worked out outside of the legislative process.
I'd like to take a closer look at that piece of bill because.
Oh, yeah, you don't need, you can just get back to me on that.
Okay.
Great. Yes, Representative Buss.
Thank you. I have a question about the title funds. So I know in the LEA is the grant writer for all title funds. And that has to do with not just kids on IEP, but it also has to do with professional development, English language learners and whatnot. Is there, there's no reimbursement process for that grant writing, correct? So the LEA does all that work, that kid goes to the independent school. And now in Act 173, does that independent school have to provide those services? Or if they don't provide those services, is the LEA still responsible for not only writing the grant for them, but providing those services?
The LEA is ultimately responsible for providing.
Do you believe there could be a mechanism for reimbursement so that we've paid out the tuition for that kid, but we're still, the public is still responsible for a very strong amount of financial responsibility and getting the kid the services that they need, even though they paid out the tuition?
That's an interesting question. So you're saying that the public district paid tuition to the approved independent school that was general tuition plus some special education tuition, and then the special education services weren't able to be provided by the independent school?
Well, I want to make sure that the independent schools are, if a LEA pays tuition to an independent school and that independent school doesn't provide those services, then the LEA is still responsible for providing those services. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and then does the extra amount that is written to provide those services go to the independent school, or does that stay with the LA who's actually providing those services?
I think it would be, to answer that question, I think you should probably hear from someone who is a special education administrator.
Okay, thank you.
And I think Representative Buss asked a question earlier, or brought up a point earlier in our conversation about this that I thought was intriguing, and that is that by federal law, independent schools have a right to title funding. But the LEA does the footwork to secure that title funding. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, I have a limited knowledge about this particular.
Yeah, we
I
are.
think that's correct.
And so I think that the question was more along the lines of, could there be a reimbursement for the work that the LEA is doing to secure those title funds that are going to the independent school?
Yeah, I think that would be a good question to ask. There is actually, at the Agency of Education, there's an ombudsman for those title funds, and that would be a good question for that person.
Speaking of title funds, I have a question, and that is, I thought that any school that received federal dollars had to accommodate for students on a 504 plan anyway. I think that's one reason why you don't see it in the bill, is because that it was assumed that was already happening. Is that correct?
That may be why it wasn't in the bill, but I don't think it hurts to sort of have a belt and suspenders and make sure it's clear in there, because by leaving it out, it could be interpreted to not be required.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so we'll thank you. And I guess I didn't know if the DSA wanted to add on at all.
No, Jeff Francis, I don't have anything to add to Sue's testimony. I would add that I watched the H409 testimony yesterday with interest. And when the time comes for the committee to discuss that, I've got folks I can bring in on that restraint and seclusion topic.
Yep. Yeah. Very, very important topic for us to look at. Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We're going to have Ledge Council come in tomorrow to talk about this. I guess it would be good that if people have things that they sort of would like to see in or out of the bill, that I could bring that to Ledge Council so that tomorrow she's prepared to talk about that. So based on sort of testimony that we received, maybe stuff that the committee has received, I would open it up to folks if there's something that they'd like to bring up.
When you want to do that now, or when you want to?
No, let's while we got some time right now.
Okay.
Right.
So is it, what's the process?
Oh, I'm sorry. We have 2 minutes before.
Yeah.
Okay.
2 minutes.
All right, then we'll hold there, and we have 2 minutes, but if our folks, do we have them available?
I'm right here.
Oh, great. I sort of, given the weather, I assumed everybody was going to come in via Zoom. Your name is?
Roy Starlin.
Great, Roy. Why don't you go ahead and have a seat up front and join us? And I guess I would just ask, I didn't see much testimony on our committee page for today. So if you have written testimony, if you could provide it to our committee assistant, be great. Otherwise, we welcome you and we look forward to your testimony. Just tell us who you are, tell us about your school, where you are, who you serve, that sort of thing, before you jump in.
Sure, and I want to be conscious of Julie's time as well. She's online. She's the head of a neighboring school. So my name's Roy Starling. I'm the head of the Riverside School in the Northeast Kingdom in Lyndonville, Vermont. We serve 120 students, pre-K to 8. Between K and 8, about between 60 and 70% of our students come with state tuition. Of those students, 1 in 5 receive some kind of services. Yes.
Sorry, the door slammed. How many students did you?
120.
And out of that?
Out of that, between 60 and 70%. The number's a little inexact because pre-K counts as a completely separate. So between K and 8, I think the number is 63% roughly. Of the remaining 30-something percent, the majority receive some financial aid to come to our school. We provide learning support services, a variety of types, to about 1 in 5 kids. And our mission is to develop active learners, engaged citizens, patient leaders, and a supportive community. And we sort of take that into consideration with every decision we make in the classroom or out. And we're day school, and we're located in Lyndonville, though most of our students come from the NEK Choice District, which stretches from Kirby, which is really right next to us, all the way up, I think, to the Canadian border. And we get some kids from Peacham as well. And maybe I'll let Julie introduce. Like I said, I want to be conscious of our time, or I can just.
I think it'd be better if we divide you.
Oh, separately. Okay. Yeah, I'll do the first half. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. So that's sort of an overview of the school. We've been in our main building's an old farmhouse. We have built a new building subsequently about 10 years ago for most of our elementary classes. We've been around for just a little over 40 years. If I didn't say it before, our sort of primary focus is very community-based. It's a casual environment. Students most often call their teachers by their first name. Our campus looks a little different. We've got a few dogs running around. Kids have a little more freedom of movement, but with that comes more responsibility. That's sort of the home model. I sometimes refer to the Reggio Emilia model of pre-K you may have heard of, where they talk about the environment being one of the there's the student, there's the teacher, and then there's the environment in which you learn. And I often tell visiting families that the home is the environment in which we learn. And that's, the reason I came to the school was as a dad, quite honestly. I wanted my boys to have that experience. I think that's sort of an overview of the school. Certainly we'll touch on more stuff with questions if you guys have them about. It's a lot of what I heard earlier we could comment on with respect to accountability and reporting and funding and special education and discrimination. I have a lot to say about that. I guess the last thing I would say, just sort of in closing, I'm here, part of the reason I'm here is an advocate for our school, also for the Northeast Kingdom. I believe that, for generations now, Vermont has been working really hard to attract young working families with kids. The Northeast Kingdom is an often underserved corner of the state. We don't have the economic engine that a lot of the rest of the state has. I often use the metric that my students live about an hour and a half away from an escalator. When I take them to Boston, we have kids that haven't seen Burlington, right? And so that's just a data point, but I think it gives a little context to how the Northeast Kingdom really is. We're out there, and what's happening in the Northeast Kingdom now is that demographic change that Vermont has so long sought. What we have to offer is our outdoors. We don't have large industries there. And in the age of remote work and sort of, I don't use the term too loosely, but sort of COVID refugees from Brooklyn and Boston and wherever, looking for a better place to raise families, the fact that we have that outdoor access, that people can work remotely. And I think equally importantly, if you ask any realtor in the kingdom, that the access to excellent schools, including our wonderful local public schools, a variety of different independent schools at the K-8 level, and some excellent high schools play a huge part in that demographic shift we're seeing, and it's serving the kingdom well. And it's really, I think, cornerstone of our economy. So.
We just ask,
You want to go through all of them, or
what's that?
all of them, or questions as we go?
Well, I said here, that was.
That was my overview.
Yep. So I don't know if you had any prepared remarks on our committee bill specifically that I would do.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't know if you guys would have the questions for me or if I could tell. There's a few things in there that I'm really quite happy about. Excuse me. Obviously we have one concern I have is that there's been a lot of work and time and effort put into the 2200 series rules the AOE and Act 173, which I'm sure you guys all well understand those. But the process of onboarding those things is going to be immensely complicated at both the state and school level, public and independent. There's a lot of changes there that we gladly embrace. And I would just hope that this very thoughtful process, one of the things I love most about this state is our ability to have nuanced and civil conversations with each other, from legislators to citizens. And there's been a lot of that that's happened over the last couple of years, and the implementation of those two bills was delayed because of the pandemic. And so we, as a school, as almost every other independent school I know, have been working really hard over the last couple of years to build up support staff and to adopt policies and to make changes based on this pending legislation that comes into effect at the end of July over this summer. And so I think, if the concern broadly is that independent schools are not serving a wide enough array of learning styles or providing enough supports, that concern, in fact, has been largely addressed by those bills, which also include more forceful anti-discrimination statements, which we, of course, gladly adopt and post. So that's one element of this bill. I think that, was already on course to happen and was a good change that came out in large part from this committee a few years ago. A couple of other things in there around reporting I have some concerns about as head of school. I wonder about redundancy in as much as I just heard, all of our publicly funded kids are required to take the entire array of standardized tests within the state, VCAPs and the science tests. And I am granted access to our school's scores through the Cambium portal. And there are varying levels of access that one can get as allowed by the AOE. And I guess I'm actually surprised to hear that, for example, Nathan Freeman, the superintendent of NEK Choice, doesn't automatically have access to those scores. I've sent them. Our scores have been quite good. They've gone up. Our Riverside's standardized test scores are higher than they've been since 2015. And I can explain a lot of why I think that's happened. A lot of it's about the supports we built in anticipation of Act 173. But we'll send them to anybody that wants to see them. I had just assumed there was already access to those. And I'm quite surprised that a superintendent who pays for the tuition at a school doesn't automatically have access to that. Certainly, we also use progress monitoring software and have plenty of other ways to assert our students' good learning. I do, as a person that grew up in Florida, parents who are public school teachers, and many of my family are also, it tends to run in the family for some reason, teaching does. I know that the very well-intentioned system in larger states with, with huge districts, the very well-intentioned system of making sure that there's quality controls right down to the sort of minute by minute in a classroom can in fact cut against that at times. If you were, for example, a second grade teacher in Florida, you know what your standardized test is, and that's about all you have time to think about. And that's an unfortunate side effect of what I think is a well-intentioned move towards accountability in education, which I'm all for. I just think, again, back to the point of what I love about Vermont, we can have more nuanced conversations here, and different schools have different missions and they exist in different lanes and they may seek different outcomes with students. And I would assume that there's some latitude around that. The other reporting part that I would just put on your radar, small schools like mine, our funding model is very different than a large independent school like St. Johnsbury Academy, or even a public school, or a small school with designation, perhaps like Village School North Bennington. We don't get to set our tuition. We don't have an endowment to draw from. So our entire operating budget comes from full pay, that's state announced tuition, full pay times students. And we have to work backwards from there. So we don't have an administration. If there's a toilet that needs work, it's me. If the janitor doesn't show up, it's one of us that does that. We don't have an extra tier of people to sort of oversee extra administrative burdens, to use that word. Another thing, because we're putting all this money into unreimbursed interventions, which we're doing now, we have a special educator, licensed speech therapist, a counselor, literacy, and a math specialist. We're serving more students than we ever had. Because of that money's unreimbursed. We don't have the tens of thousands of dollars per year it costs to subscribe to a learning management system like Jump Rope, for example, which most schools use. So the reporting would require, we take our attendance on a piece of paper and enter it into a spreadsheet. And I know that we are responsible for every student that comes to our school, legally responsible for their presence and their educational outcomes. And if a student, as so many in Vermont did, a couple students kind of went AWOL on us. The first thing I do is I reach out to the superintendent of the district from which that school comes, because I believe that's a legal responsibility I have. So there's no question as to whether we would do that. The question is if in the bill, after 3 days or some such, that does become a burden, because we tend to gather our attendance. We sit down at the library table, my director of operations and me, with the piece of paper and count, right? Like that's we are low tech, low budget. We work on a shoestring to do what we do. And so I think it would be burdensome. You would probably have to create a state portal or some sort of data transfer statewide that seemed uniform to work with superintendents. That seems, it seems like there's probably a better way, even if it just means the interval with which those reports go to the district was stretched out a little with some sort of caveat. If a student is deemed truant, which there's a legal definition of, that of course, as we already do, we pick the phone right up. So those are my two sort of main sort of feedback on the bill. Like I said, I believe 2200 and 173 are doing great work, and they're so incredibly complicated that, I've asked lawyers and lobbyists and representatives from different organizations about how is this going to actually play out. And not everybody knows. And I'm talking about the AOE, I'm talking about educational lawyers. There's just so much. It's this tremendous, complicated, and again, from our perspective, welcome change to be able to offer what we do to more kids. To throw something on top of it rather than parallel to it might be disastrous for all the work that was done ahead of time. And then with respect to reporting, just realizing, some smaller schools, I can think of the East Burke School, which is an independent school in the village of East Burke. I think they have 12 kids, 9 through 12. For kids that need that really small, intimate environment, that is a wonderful opportunity, but I can't imagine they have more than 1 or 2 people there. And so, who does that work and how does it look when it gets entered? So sort of my comments on the bill.
Thank you. We're going to do a quick round of questions. We do have another person.
Right.
Witness, Representative Brady.
You said you're 50 to 60% students who are publicly
A little over 60 if you're going K-8, yes, ma'am.
do the private pay students then, the remainder of those students, do they pay the same tuition as what is being billed for the public pay students?
Yes, our tuition is set as soon as the state announces its state average. We set the tuition, we put that in contract. We do offer some financial aid. And some of that comes from donors. Some of it comes out of the operating budget. But yes, we charge the same amount to everybody.
But it's possible some of those private pay students would be paying less than what the public dollars are supporting for that 60% or so of students?
Yeah, it's possible. Mm-hmm.
Representative Stone.
Hi, I was just looking at your admission criteria and I see that it's set up when students visit for the day, teachers collect work and make observations. Yep. I also see that you only have 11 spots available and 32 applicants as of 2/21/23.
Right.
And it also says that you heavily weigh student engagement and family support for the schools, including alumni, parents or siblings, current siblings, et cetera.
Yep.
So if you don't have many spots and you have a lot of people vying to get those.
That's accurate.
When you say make observations and collect work, what does that mean? What are objective measures that you are looking for? And also looking at your specific criteria, it looks like a lot of it's pretty subjective. A child who is naturally engaged and shows curiosity for learning, who persists through challenges. But just going back to where it says make observations and collect work, what are those teachers observing and what is the work that they're collecting?
Yeah. So the level of work, we even this year, even though Act 173 and 2200 don't go in effect till this summer, we did not this year ask about students' learning needs beyond what you would observe in the classroom. One of the things, it's actually a concern I have with the 2200 series rules is that schools will not find out until after they have accepted a student whether that student has an IEP or a special learning plan, which I think is a very fair way of doing it. However, there's a lot of work ahead of time we need to be able to do to make sure we can meet the needs of a student who comes to us. And so an example of that might be, a couple of years ago, when we were interviewing students virtually, we had several students that we accepted that came to us in the fall that needed a lot of intervention. And we had not staffed for that or planned for that because we'd not had the ability to sort of interact with that student and know how we could support them. So for example, if you're a third grade teacher and you have or fourth grade teacher in the example I'm thinking of, and you have 12 students in your classroom, and one of them comes in and they're writing at a first grade level, we need someone in there to support that child, and we need to make sure that there are appropriate pullouts and push-ins, and that we get in this case, the evaluation process rolling, because that's really important to meet that kid's needs. And so that's a big part of that.
Representative Buss?
Thank you. You mentioned unreimbursed services
Yes.
for those with special needs. Is that because they are on an EST and they don't qualify for an IEP?
No, in fact, what some independent schools do, and I saw you guys when I was here for the Big Visa event a few weeks ago, you had somebody from a small independent school in Burlington, and we follow the same path as a lot of independent schools do. There was a brief period after consolidation where the district, the NEK Choice District, being obligated to provide special services for students, was providing them in-house. They were sending someone. And then there was a sort of twilight of that where we were actually able to get some reimbursement. And then as the district grew and the state looked at that, they determined that that wasn't the appropriate way to do that. So what we did instead was we met with every parent of every child that was on an IEP at that time. And we gave them the option. We are not currently a certified school to offer special education. So you cannot receive special ed services at our school. However, that's a common sort of designation. And what we do is, like I said, we do have a special educator. Our special educator passed in the spring, and our current interventionist is getting the license right now. So we employ a special educator, we employ a speech therapist. That all just comes out of our budget. And what we tell the parents is, if you choose to forego special ed services, we will keep your 504 as we're legally required to, and we will create a service plan that was verbatim what the IEP was, and we will continue to provide those services. And because I was in the LD room through school. I mean, I have my own learning disabilities, and there's nothing more important to me to making sure we provide equity of access to what we do, because I believe so deeply in the outcomes that our school gets. I want every kid that comes onto our campus to be able to access that and to have the outcomes that I see. I was not myself provided very good special education supports. So it's been really important to me, probably other than managing COVID over the last 2 years, and maybe more so than managing COVID. Building a very vigorous system of supports has been a key initiative of our school. So they have service plans, 504s. We have a student support team. We have progress monitoring software. We keep logs of what they're doing. So de facto, it's not legally considered services under an IEP, but they are getting the same amount of contact time with either a special educator, interventionist, speech pathologist, or push into the classroom that they would otherwise have gotten.
I'm going to just close this out here because I want to make sure that Julie Hansen has an opportunity to testify. Julie, welcome to the House Education Committee.
Can you, oh, there we are. Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, Roy.
So please introduce yourself. Tell us about
I'm
your
sorry.
school.
I'm getting ready. I want to just give you a little background. We just had a power outage at our school. So I have raced to my daughter's house, who is a gamer and a streamer. So we've been busy blurring her background. So here I am. And also, speaking of learning disabilities, I think had they had those services when I was in school, I've been probably diagnosed with ADD, because I have a story with every paragraph. So I'm going to read my testimony, or you'll hear every story. So I'm going to start.
I hope that includes where Thaddeus Stevens is.
Absolutely. It's all here. Absolutely. Thank you, Representative Conlon and committee, for including us today. And a very special, I'm not sure I see her there, to Representative Williams for being so responsive to the people in the Northeast Kingdom during the fleshing out of this bill. Thank you. Thank you so much. I am Julie Hansen, founding head of Thaddeus Stevens School, located in East Burke, Vermont. I also serve on the Act 1 Ethnic and Social Equity Standards Advisory Working Group, which I've been on for about 3 years, I think. In January, Thaddeus Stevens School completed its second accreditation self-study through the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. I'd like to tell you a bit about our school and then talk about some specific issues with regard to independent schools and their role in Vermont's educational landscape. In 1999, I and a small group of parents founded Thaddeus Stevens School and opened our doors to 7th, 7th, and 8th grade students. We slowly grew into the pre-K to 8 school that we are now, which is around 35 students. As you know, Thaddeus Stevens was born in Danville, Vermont in 1792 into a deeply impoverished family. He was born with what used to be called a club foot and red hair, both of which were deemed to be the result of a past familial sin. In 1807, his single-parent mother moved the family to Peacham, Vermont, so that they could attend the Peacham Academy. Upon completion of his education at both University of Vermont and Dartmouth, he moved to Pennsylvania and became a representative to the U.S. Congress. He worked his way through the legislature to earn the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, just in time for the Civil War. A strong abolitionist, he worked with President Lincoln to pass the 13th Amendment and was the primary author of the 14th Amendment. His legacy permeates our school culture. He certainly proved the power and transformative nature of education. His commitment to equality and inclusivity has inspired our curricular offerings and our policies. Our culture of anti-demonstration and inclusion is woven throughout every aspect of our school. And finally, he serves as a pathway to inspire our rural students. Thaddeus Stevens was from an impoverished single-parent family and was born with a disability and became one of the most influential representatives in American history. He embodied the highest ideals of the American Constitution. As we say to students, Thaddeus Stevens did not know when he was 12 that he would become instrumental in leading the nation to accomplishing the promise of liberty and justice for all. Martin Luther King did not know when he was 12 he would become an international leader in the continuing fight for freedom and equality. Our message to our students is, be ready to be great. I understand that one of the concerns driving this bill is with regard to anti-discrimination laws and rules. There are two components to adopting school policies. One is the adoption of the rule, and the second is ensuring enforcement or accountability. For independent schools, accreditation is a form of that accountability. Independent schools must demonstrate compliance with a set of standards. We must show evidence that our curricular offerings and our policies reflect and honor diversity, ensure equity in our student and professional communities, and embrace the inclusion of all students in all our offerings. If we have not met that standard, we must show that a plan is in place to meet that standard. Secretary French indicated yesterday that such a mechanism is not currently in place in the public system. This moves us to look at the reasons a family might choose an independent school. The diversity of Vermont's families propels the need for a diversity of approaches in education. We have had some families who send one of their children to Thaddeus Stevens School while enrolling another child in the local public school. Independent schools are small, intentional, and adaptive. We, in particular, at TSS, are driven by a mission of inclusivity that guides all decisions that impact our schools. One school simply cannot meet the needs of every student. One methodology cannot serve every student. To fully achieve the mandate to provide an education for all students, there must be a diversity of offerings to our families. With regard to special education and students on IEPs, even the best intentions IEPs don't always work for that child. Our school has enrolled students who are on IEPs, and we have not had a special educator on site, which we do know will change by July of 2023, which I think we all support and think is a good thing. In order for a student on an IEP to enroll in our school, parents are forced by the district to sign off on any services for their child. Any services that TSS offers the student will come from our existing budget. Why would a family do that? And here is why a family would do that. We had a student who was on a very serious IEP, and he was with us for years. He'd been through the Stern Center, a number of places to evaluate his difficulty and true struggle with learning to read. There seemed to be something literally with his eye shape and in his eye that prevented this. We explained to the parents that we were very small, and that we couldn't offer the range of services that he had. And their response was, we know that. He is pulled out so often of so many classes. We just want him to be in school. We'll worry about his reading progress. We said we have a responsibility to ensure that our students are progressing. But they did finally enroll, and he was a wonderful addition to our school community. He was in our school musical. He was a great artist, interestingly, given that he had an issue with his eyes. But that family paid their tuition for the child. actually all their children ended up enrolling, but sometimes parents don't want their children pulled out. They just want them to do school. It seems that there needs to be a role for that somehow in our educational system. Any family that lives in a town with a designated school and wishes to attend TSS, whether their child is on an IEP or not, also forfeits a free and public education and must pay out of pocket. Why would they do that? Increasingly, students are experiencing emotional issues that really need sensitivity and care. And again, large schools, not all schools can provide the attention that some students need. We enrolled, we've had 3 students questioning their gender identity that just had been, it had been very challenging for them in the public schools because one school cannot meet the needs of every single student. So those are some of the reasons. I think most families begin in public school. Public schools are large. They're deeply committed to doing an excellent job for all their students. But sometimes you just can't. They have needs, particularly now. I think the emotional needs of students have been exacerbated in our country.
I don't mean to interrupt, we have just limited time.
All right. Okay.
And I want
Well,
to make sure
as
that
I
if you
say,
have comments on the committee bill
Yeah.
specifically, that we have time to hear them.
well, my comments are about, let's go to licensing then. It's a huge area of disagreement. There's no study that confirms that a licensed teacher is a better or more effective teacher. And most of us in independent school education, since you have to go to more classes to get licensing, I would rather, if I have a teacher who goes back to school to take a course, that they're studying the course, the subject and the content area that they are teaching, so that they can really move kids through to what we call the higher order level of thinkings, to move beyond comprehension and memorization. So that's an issue that I really hope you'll take a look at. Well, I guess I'll end. I was just trying to cover all the bases that have been involved in the writing of this bill. The other advantage to independent schools is that we can set our own calendar. So, for example, we don't take Veterans Day or Memorial Day as a holiday. We participate in Lyndonville's Veterans Day service, and we actually put on the entire service for the town of Peacham on Memorial Day. I think if we want to teach every child, we have to allow them the opportunity to find the methodologies and the environments that work for them and allow them to flourish. I don't know why we'd want to limit that possibility for them, particularly in the rural area. I am concerned there's a little bit of rural urban issues going here. I think I would invite you to come to the Northeast Kingdom, visit some of the schools, and see that we are meeting the needs of an awful lot of children and families who live in very disparate parts of Vermont.
So there's only a couple minutes left. I want to see if there were any questions. Representative Stone and then Representative Brady.
Hey, I'm from Burlington, but I built a deer camp in Ferdinand, so I've spent a lot of time.
There you
go. Don't make an assumption. So I'm reading on your website right now that criteria for admission is making sure that kids are a good fit for the school and the community. And then also one of the criteria that you look at is the ability to pay fees and other student expenses. Also on your website, I see that there are some fees that aren't covered in the tuition. I'm wondering if you have financial support for these kids who are coming in from sending towns who may not be able to pay those fees. Like there's a $50 fee to apply to send in an application for your school.
I'm sorry, I think you're mixing our schools up.
I'm talking to both. On your website, there's a $50 fee to apply. And
Are you talking about Thaddeus Stevens School?
Yes.
I think that's not accurate. There is no fee.
Well, while we're sorting that out, could you tell us what percentage of your students are public pay?
I think it's about 25 or 30 this year. It's not that many.
Okay, everybody else is a private pay. Or did I say that backwards?
Yeah,
And we
well, percent or number, because I know you said it's only about 35 kids overall.
35 kids overall, and how many of those 35 kids are?
I think there may be 8 students.
8 students who are publicly
Maybe.
funded.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll fix that. There are no obstacles to applying, and we feel very strongly about that. So I'm going to go back and look at that. I don't know where that came from.
It says if you decide to apply for financial aid, use a third party.
Yes,
But if you need a financial aid to, like, if there are any fees that aren't covered with tuition, so say field trips or books or
no,
lab fees or things like
that's
that.
there are no fees.
Okay.
There are no fees
And would
because
your
that's an
school-
obstacle. That's an obstacle to their admissions.
Okay.
Likewise, we don't charge for field trips, special activities, or textbooks. Any school store account might be a pizza on Wednesday, or if they need to go get a notebook from what we call Audrey's Closet, our little school store. Those are the fees. There's a $30 application fee, which we've not been charging lately because I can't guarantee a spot because we've been full for the last couple of years. So I don't want to, not profit off people that are trying to just see if there's a space. So.
Representative Brady.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question about your enrollment and tuition. So for the public pay for the private pay students, which is the majority of your students, is their tuition the same, the tuition they're charged the same as what the publicly tuitioned students, what we're paying?
Yes.
Okay.
And do you both have open enrollment for publicly funded students?
Well, we're only, when we are.
For the capacity that you have.
For the capacity that we have, we're only coming into this world now. I mean, historically, Riverside was a small school of about 40 or 50, and there was a selection process. I mean, I do think it's important to point out that, as Secretary French said a week or so ago, that different schools exist for reasons. For example, there might be, and I'll talk quickly, I know we're running out of time, but each school has a mission and a method of education that it provides. And so there are have been before Act 173 goes into effect, some types of kids, we have a much more open campus, right? And so we need a little bit of an investment in what we do for a student to be able to, right? We just don't have the facility that a bigger school has. And so there's going to be some limitations maybe. I don't anticipate anywhere near as many of those when we're able to be more fully staffed after Act 173 goes into effect. But historically, Riverside and the teachers have just sort of met and made sure that the kid, really, if I have to describe it, kind and curious, they want to be there. That's more or less what we're looking for. At this point, we're accepting pretty much, because we have so few spots, if you have a sibling at the school, that may be the only spaces we have left right now. Our septic only holds 120, and that's where we're limited. So.
Ultimately, everything boils down to septic.
It comes down to septic.
Great. Quick question from Representative Austin, and then we have some.
I'm just wondering about how you assess academic performance the kids are reaching proficiencies at their grade levels.
Well, we look at sort of grade expectations from 2 or 3 other. I've looked at the standardized ERB, sort of what are they testing and what should be the average scores. We did those for a couple of years. It costs a little bit of money, so we stepped back. And we have criteria. Everybody has rubrics and standards, and what does this assignment? What are the points worth? What is the skill we're trying to build, and where are you in the range of that? We have just become a candidate for the International Baccalaureate School, and they have. I think they use a narrative, so we're sort of learning about how that narrative equates to an A, B, C, or D sort of standard.
And from our perspective, much the same. We very closely scrutinize our VCAP SBAC scores, and we also have a progress monitoring software system that we use 3 through 8, in addition to our long traditional A through F grading system.
When your kids go on to high school, do you get feedback from the high school
Yes.
about how your kids are doing?
Yes.
And if they're well prepared?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that
To
too.
clarify one thing is when we talk about whose kids are whose, and you're talking about
Yeah.
being responsible for the kids. And I guess would reiterate that ultimately the LEA is legally
Correct,
responsible for all kids.
Yeah. Yeah, well, one of the sales points for me when I was applying for the job, I've been teaching at a prep school in Florida, and I was sort of looking around, and Riverside seemed awfully small, and it was a middle school. I wasn't sure. They told me they'd had 5 consecutive valedictorians at St. Johnsbury Academy that had been Riverside graduates. I think definitely like academic rigor is something we wear on our sleeves for sure. Within the same breath, if a kid needs some help, we're going to give it to them.
Yeah, no, sounds good.
I apologize for moving things along, but we have actually 2 more of your colleagues from a couple more independent schools scheduled for 11:30. So thank you both very much for your input and your time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Yeah, and you'll have my email because I emailed you all about H258 or whatever. So please feel free to follow up with any questions. And as Julie said, feel free to visit.
Yeah, please.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for making the check.
Thanks.
Okay, we now have joining us via Zoom, Timothy Newbold from the Village School of North Bennington, which has an interesting history, and Jennifer Zakara, the head of school at Vermont Academy, who we have not actually heard anything from or know much about. I don't know if either of you had an idea of who would like to speak first, or if you'd like the chair to use his discretion and pick somebody.
Why don't you speak first, because then you can give the introduction to your school and then we can go over the sections.
Okay, great. I'm so happy to meet you, and I'm happy to have this be the first time that you're hearing from Vermont Academy. We are 150 years old in 2026. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that we have been around for a while. When I went up to the University of Vermont to do some research about my school, where I am 6 years into a headship, I found out that most of our rosters had local students in the early days. The school is roughly about 200 students, as it was in 1876. One other really interesting fact about my school is we were founded as a co-ed school, and that was very unusual in 1876. So we're pretty proud of that. Early graduates included Florence Sabin, who founded the first Colorado healthcare system. Her statue's in the Capitol, and we honor her with our alumni awards. She studied science at Vermont Academy in 1876 with laboratory science. And then James P. Taylor was our assistant head of school, who really laid down the culture of the school. He's the founder of the Long Trail. And that was something that has persisted in terms of outdoor programming and all of our special events. Tim and I are really happy to be here today representing the Vermont Independent School Association. We're both on the executive committee. I'm also on the ASME board. And I'm happy to talk about a variety of topics. We plan to go through the bill and in consecutive order with the different sections, and then to offer you time to ask us questions as well.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
So thank you for having us this morning. We very much appreciate your time. So I'm Tim Newbold. I'm the head of the Village School of North Bennington, and I met with you a few weeks ago, so you know a little bit of the history of our school. We are now in our 10th year of operation as an independent school. Before that, we were the school, the public school in this area, and had been so since about 1870. And had many iterations in that lifetime, an elementary school, a high school, a K through 12 school, and now we're a school that's pre-K through 6 and serving about 125 students. And the vast majority of which come from North Bennington and Shaftesbury District 1, which is our sending district, and we have a great relationship with that district. In fact, last week when we went through the vote, the vote for our tuition and our support for the overall budget was more than 3-1. So I think our community really speaks highly of how we are approaching the work here with students. So we wanted to cover a couple different things on behalf of VISA and our individual schools. So if we look at the proposed bill, one thing we would like to see clarification in is around the idea of enrolling the enrollment requirements. And this is whether students are placed or referred, and this has to do with students who are who might fall into that IEP category or special education category. And the question there for us is that if a team places them in a school or refers them to one of our schools, if they then are there for a while and then the team decides that this is not necessarily the right fit, what is the process for that student to then be placed out of that school? And to give you an example, I mean, even public schools in our area have school students enter into their school, and then over time, the IEP team may determine that this is really not the right fit, that there might be a specialized program that school would go to. And we want to make sure that the independent schools that are new to this process, my school's been doing it now for years, but the other independent schools that are new to this process have a defined process in which how that's going to follow, so that they understand if this is really not the right fit, can they work with the LEA to find the right placement for that student. So that's one piece of clarification. As far as the accreditation piece, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when I was in there to testify on another proposed bill. And Visa very much encourages all independent schools to become accredited. We find the accreditation process really beneficial to the schools. Right now I'm on an accrediting team for another school in Vermont, and the process is great, and it's a rigorous process. And I've been a part of teams for both ASNE and for NEASC, and I find both of those processes very important and very informative for the schools. And I think it's a great process for any school to go through. One of the clarifying pieces we have, though, is whether the therapeutic schools will have to be accredited. They go through a different kind of approval process. And the question then is, will they be their own separate category, or will they have to go through an accreditation process through NEASC or ASNE? Another element we wanted to talk about is, and I think the Historic Academies have written you a letter and submitted that for your review, but they question the idea of the 3 or more unexcused absences. We suggest that this be moved like them. We suggest that this be moved to section 15 because that may be the more appropriate space for it. And I think, like Roy was talking about earlier, just a little while ago, I think this may need some greater discussion. I mean, I think we're more than willing to do this. It's just a matter of understanding the process. And I think it's going to need some greater discussion between the AOE, the LEA, and the independent schools. What actually constitutes an absence or an unexcused absence? And we really need to define those pieces and then figure about a process of how that can happen. But the independent schools are willing to do that. We just want to really understand the process, and it needs to be laid out well. Another thing is, complying to the Public Accommodations Act. Visa member schools already do this and meet this requirement as part of their membership. So we can absolutely support that piece. And we want to just also say that we are in the process of getting affirmations from all of our member schools around the public accommodations and their Fair Employment Practices Act. Right now, we're collecting those affirmations. We've already received 22 of the 62 schools in Visa. Some of the schools in Visa have already submitted their affirmations to the AOE as part of their approval process recently, and they're coming in steadily. So we absolutely are supportive of that. We would ask that, since independent schools are being asked to do this, that it might be a good practice for the AOE to also ask all the public schools to do the same thing, to attest to this on an annual basis. Another piece that we want to just talk about is, and it's an element of redundancy, but it's something we're completely in support of, is the process for which the State Board of Education can revoke or remove the approval process. So we understand that that's necessary. It's already in statute. So if they feel like it needs to be repeated here, then we completely be in support of that. So I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer now for a few other comments, and then I'll come back momentarily.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. You're muted, Jennifer.
Here we go. I have a little bit of a cold, so hopefully you can hear me fine. I'm going to trade off and through these sections as we work through the document. So one more point regarding sections 3 through 7 is that the term approved independent school was changed to schools eligible to receive public tuition. And we just wanted to say that in the current statutes and the 2200 series rules, approved independent schools may choose to accept or not accept public tuition. And we wanted clarity on whether the redefinition of approved independent school eliminates the option for a school to become SBA approved, but not to accept public tuition. We believe that this would be unfortunate and unnecessary.
I might just answer that for clarification's sake. We're trying to line up all of those terms, and we're perhaps struggling a little bit, but we're really talking about what will be the new term, which is approved independent schools, I think, which therefore means eligible to receive public dollars. But basically, the proposal you see in front of you is strictly about independent schools eligible to receive public dollars. And we are, like I said, we are making sure that the language lines up with the changes that are coming in the 2400 series.
Okay. Yes, that makes sense. We just wanted to make sure that schools were not excluded from approval.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, one other point relates to the distance for tuition, out-of-state public tuition. And, when we looked at the schools that are receiving tuition from both out-of-state dollars and in-state schools as well, it seemed a little bit arbitrary to say 25 miles versus 28 or 30, when some schools might be 2 miles beyond the point that has been determined. So if we could just say contiguous states or states.
Do you have examples of ones that may just fall out of the 25-mile range?
Of course, Proctor Academy is I believe 2 miles past the 25-mile limit. That's one example. And then I think you also might have received a note from the town academies that they also, schools get tuition from out of state as well. So that I think needs to be taken into consideration. We would recommend anyway that you look at it again. And then related to that, the states of New York, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, as well as the province of Quebec, each have non-discriminatory protections in place that satisfy the requirement that you had included in Section 8. And we're very much in favor of that. We also really are in favor of having on a school's website a prominent statement that has the compliance with the 2200 series rules. The Vermont Independent School Association supports those rules completely. When they were adopted, we continue to do so. And we have many of our schools have this on their websites and are writing separate statements as well to make sure that it's very clear that our position is strong on this point. Let's see. Tim, maybe we're moving on to Section 9.
Yep. So the next piece we wanted to discuss is just the idea of through the new funding process for publicly funded students, there's the weighting process and the weighing in which they get more, they count for more of a student based on their language needs and things like that. And so we just want to make sure that that is clearly understood by the independent schools, because in what you're asking here is for the independent schools to report to the LEAs or to their sending districts the students that are coming in. And it doesn't benefit any of the independent schools anyway, in which I think we're more than willing to do this. We just, again, want to make sure the process is clarified for where the student, what the LEA needs or what the district needs for that. I think anytime we can build these into the legislation, the process in which it's going to happen, it makes it expedite a lot quicker. If we move on to Section 12, there's another question for the therapeutic schools that they have regarding these. They do like the fact that this actually puts into statute the idea of therapeutic schools as a label defined in SBE Rule 2222. Visa concurs with this. One thing that they just want to clarify again is that the therapeutic schools that are accepting publicly funded students will also still have the ability to enroll privately funded students, so that this doesn't preclude them from doing that. So going through this process and being labeled as such in this process, that they are still able to have privately pay students enroll from families that want that. If we jump on to Section 15, reporting of academic progress, and Roy talked a little bit about this. We're not opposed to this in any way, shape, or form from Visa and our member schools. Again, we just want to make sure that there's a clear process built in place, and we'd like to see a reciprocal exchange so that the LEAs are providing information to the independent schools of students that they already have information on. So if a student is coming from a public elementary or middle school and attending one of the high schools, independent high schools, they want to make sure that they get all the information ahead of that student coming into them so that they're prepared to serve them well. So that's going to involve, again, good conversations between the LEAs and the independent schools to clarify a process for that. So I'm going to hand it back to Jennifer.
Yeah, I think there's a theme that we have here with this section 15. My next 2 points for us are that Part B requires all schools eligible to receive public tuition to certify annual compliance, which we would agree with, but we would hope that the same expectation is made explicit for the public schools. And then for Part C, which requires the agency to review all policies public schools are required to adopt and make recommendations, et cetera. We would hope that this would also be universal and that any requirement on public independent schools should be evaluated on whether it should also be applied to public schools. We're all after the very best situation, learning situation for students. So the reciprocity theme here in section 15 seems to make sense to us. I guess we'll move on to section 18. There's a comment, notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, the state Board of Education shall prohibit from approving an application for initial approval of an approved independent school until further direction by the General Assembly. This was a little concerning for us because there is at least one initial approved application in progress, I believe, with the AOE right now. And, there are various ways in which schools can become more efficient through partnerships and any number of situations where there might be a need for an independent school in a rural area. So we would just question this requirement and wonder what its justification is. It also creates, a lot of, there's further backlog and oversight for the Department of Education. But overall, we just were wondering what the justification of this section would be.
I'm sorry, this was section what number?
It's section 18.
This is essentially what comes down to a moratorium?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that seemed a little bit extreme right now to us. And just, we represent the Independent School Association right now. And we just wanted to look out for a need for independent schools, should there be one in the future, or some standby cases where there is an application right now.
Yeah, I think that it's fair to say that we probably should look at the who might be in process and existing applications. I think that's a fair point. I think the overall philosophy that's out there, and it's still up for debate within the committee, is to say that the town tuition program was frankly not meant to be a growth industry, and that at least we need to put a kind of a pause on it until at such time as the General Assembly wants to address it in the future.
Okay, that's great. And I'll just finish before you ask questions by saying that, Tim and I and the Visa organization really want to ally with you on working on the very best learning situations for students. And we believe in independent schools. I'm sure Tim has a background in public schools, as do I. I'm a public school graduate. My parents were teachers as well. We really hope that we can go forward and figure out the best way for our students.
Great. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate your very specific comments on very specific parts of the bill. It's helpful to us. I really like to say that. I'm just going to look around the committee to see if there are questions. Representative Brady has a question.
What percent I'm just trying to get consistent information here for the Vermont Academy. What percentage of your students are publicly funded?
Well, I have the exact number for you. We have 15 students out of 200, and they come from Ludlow, Marlborough, Dover, and Vernon.
Are they day students or boarding students?
They are day students.
Yeah. And what is your breakdown, just day students versus boarding students as a whole?
roughly we're about 75 boarding and 25% day students.
Thank you.
So what would be the farthest travel distance for those day students?
You know, it's really up to the families because we offer the boarding as well. And some students start out when they're younger with day and then go to boarding. But in answer to your question, it's usually about 50 minutes.
Thanks.
I don't know anybody past that amount.
And Tim, how about North Bennington? As I recollect, I think you're close to 100%.
Yeah, so we're over 90% publicly funded from North Bennington and Shasberry District 1. And then the private pay families are coming from Bennington, Pownell, Arlington, a couple from just over the border in New York, because we're about 5 minutes from the New York border.
And did you say that you have been an independent school for 10 years?
So that we are now, we've now been an independent school for 10 years, yes.
Okay, I thought it came into being during Act 46.
No, it was before.
Before that, okay, thank you. Representative Austin.
Yep, and I apologize if I didn't hear this from both of you, but just how many students do you have and what are their grades?
Oh, you know what? I think we forgot to say that. Vermont Academy is 9th through 12th grade plus postgraduate.
And how many students?
We're about 200 in any given year. Right now, we're about 201.
Okay.
And we're a pre-K through 6 school, and we serve about 145 kids.
Thank you.
Would it be fair to say, Tim, that you essentially serve as kind of the local school for your district?
I would say that, yes. We are the de facto school in some respects, absolutely.
Representative Bradige.
Well, I guess a follow-up to that is, why not be the local public school? What's the?
Well, that's a decision the community made multiple times. I think there were 3 or 4 votes at least to go through that process. I think they did this in looking into the crystal ball and seeing consolidation as a concern, and as schools were getting smaller and the Vermont student population was going down over time, they did not want to lose this school. It really was a cornerstone of the community. And by closing it down as a public school and reopening it as an independent school, they have local control over it. It's not the state that can say this school is no longer viable or functioning, that we need to shut it down and we need to transfer those students to other schools. I think that really was the reason. So far it's worked out pretty well for us. We're really proud of the work we're doing with the kids, and the community, as I said, is still very much in support of that by the approval of our budget and our tuition at over 3-1.
Representative Stone.
Hi, this is a question for Jennifer. If you could help me understand, I'm reading on your website, it says that the best way to learn about Vermont Academy is to visit and have an interview with the admissions counselor. What are you looking for in those interviews? What are the objective findings that you're hoping to gather when it comes to that process? And then also I see that there is a fee associated with the application. How much is that? And is there funding available for parents coming from sending towns who perhaps may not have the means to pay that application fee?
Yes, we do have a fee, and I'll take that part of your question first. There are also other fees at Vermont Academy, but if parents cannot afford it, we absolutely have the backup for that. We want students to be able to take part in trips and ski programs, and you name it. There is no problem getting books and food and everything else that any other student would have. We do have scholarships also that are designated for, some of them go back to the origins of the school to provide a full support for students as well. Our interview process is really a wonderful, fun experience for families. We consider ourselves a partner school with families in terms of education. So it's always great when the parents come with the students. There's an interview, a tour, sitting in on classes and so on. what we're looking for, which is I think what you're getting at, is we're looking to see if the student can thrive at Vermont Academy with our academics, if we have adequate learning support. Our Center for Learning is actually in the middle of campus, and we have historically a commitment to diverse learners because as it turns out, 35% of our graduates start their own businesses as far back as I can research to 1940. And there's a direct correlation between entrepreneurs and out-of-the-box thinkers and learners. So these are our kids. We want students who need learning support. We have all the supports for them, and we have IEPs and a staff that oversees these. There are some students that for sure we cannot accommodate. Just as an example, if there was a student who had autism in a severe level, we have several kids with autism, but if we could not accommodate them with the programs that we have, we would have to have a discussion with the family or figure out how to make that work. But generally, we're very open to all of our applicants, and we're just looking to see if we have what can help them thrive. Our strategic plan has 4 pillars that are at the root of the school, and they're all Vermont values: ingenuity, independence, community, land. So we're also looking for students who buy into that philosophy: outdoor learning, hands-on learning, getting skills for a real workforce. So that's what happens in the interview. And we also want to know what their passions and interests are so that we can help them to sign up for the right courses.
Is your tuition, your day tuition, higher than what is provided by the towns?
Our tuition is higher than what is provided by the towns, yes.
So the parents who choose to send their kids to Vermont Academy have to pay the difference?
Not if they are in-state students, or the FAFSA form that they fill out, which is a financial aid form, tells us that they cannot afford anymore.
Right. But if I'm a wealthy parent from a tuitioning town, I'm going to pay the difference between what the town pays and what you charge. It's a traditional boarding school model. I just want to.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Representative Austin, this will be the last.
Real quickly, do your students have access to a technical education center? And you also mentioned something about postgraduate.
Right.
Does that mean you also educate students beyond high school?
Yes, and this is an area I really want to do more work in for Vermont Academy. I think probably a lot of independent schools are looking at this. What skills can they get to give them immediate jobs if they want to work and go to college, or not go to college. So we don't have a vocational program, but we definitely are interested in building one out. I would say we do with robotics and engineering, and some other design-oriented coursework, let's say digital photography, video making, website, et cetera. But this is an area I think that students need more training in, and I really want to work on that. The postgraduates come and they have 2 paths. One would be that they would choose an area of concentration they want to develop beyond their prior program. And that would be a lot of independent projects, work experience, internships, et cetera, public presentations. And then the other is that they have certain skills and they have gaps that needed to be filled. And then we do that accordingly. Many of them are also looking for a topper on their athletic experience to get into college, but not all. We do have some students who are coming for the arts. They want a theater program, and they want to fill out their educational program a little bit more to give them an edge on the college process.
Thank you both very much. We appreciate your time. And again, I'll just reiterate, thank you for your very specific comments. I think they mirror the ones that we received from the town academies as well.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your time.
Bye-bye.
We'll